one species turn into another.
How is it that we find ourselves surrounded by such complexity, such elegance?
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me, we're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made of DNA.
First thing being that there is evolution. Traits in populations change over time. Traits can change enough that, in fact, you will get speciation. New species will form. And the logic of Darwinian evolution is built on just a few couple of very reasonable steps. First one is that there are traits that are heritable. Traits that could be passed on one generation to the next. The next thing is that there is variability among those traits. The next critical thing, some versions of those traits are more adaptive than others. Some versions work better for you. So you've got to have traits that are heritable. There's got to be variability in them. Some of those traits are more adaptive than others. Some of those traits make it more likely that that organism passes on copies of its genes into the next generation. And throw those three pieces together, and what you will get is evolution in populations. And when you throw in one additional piece, which is every now and then the possibility to have a random introduction of a new type of trait in there, from that you could begin to get actual large changes in what a population looks like. So how do you apply it to behavior? You do the exact same thing. There are behaviors that are heritable. They come with a certain degree of variation among individuals. Some versions of them are more adaptive than others. Over time, the more adaptive versions will become more commonplace, and every now and then you can have mutations that introduce new variability. Totally logical, absolutely unassailable. Something that is absolutely critical to emphasize, because the first thing we all need to do is unlearn something we all learned back when on all those National Geographic specials, and that would consistently teach us something about this aspect of evolution and would always teach it to us wrong. Here's the scenario. So you're watching, and there's this wildlife documentary. It's dawn on the savannah. The migration of zebras throughout East Africa, a herd of 2 million of them, migrate around following a cyclical pattern of rains. So they're always going where the grass is greener. So you've got this wonderful herd of 2 million wildebeest, and there's a problem, which is there's some great field right in front of them full of grass, and bummer, there's a river in between them and the next field. And especially a bummer, a river teeming with crocodiles just ready to grab them. So, what are the wildebeest going to do? And according to the National Geographic type specials we would get, out would come a solution. There's all the wildebeest hemming and hawing in this agitated state by the edge of the river, and suddenly from the back of the crowd comes this elderly wildebeest who pushes his way up to the front, stands on the edge of the river and says, "I sacrifice myself for you, mein Kinder," and throws himself into the river, where immediately the crocs get busy eating him up, and the other 2 million wildebeest could tiptoe around the other way across the river, and everybody's fine. And you're then saying, why'd this guy do this? Why did this guy fling himself into the river? And we would always get the answer at that point, the answer that is permeated as like the worst urban myth of evolution, whatever. Why did he do that? Because animals behave for the good of the species. This is the notion that has to be completely trashed right now. Animals behave for passing on as many copies of their genes as possible. Sometimes it may look like behaving for the good of the species, but it really isn't the case. So animals behave in order to maximize the number of copies of genes they leave in the next generation.
Evolution, the greatest show on earth. The greatest show on earth.
So what's up with the wildebeest there? And what's up with the elderly guy who jumps in the river? And finally, when you look at them long enough, instead of the camera crew showing up for 3 minutes, when you study this closely enough, you see something that wasn't apparent at first, which is this elderly wildebeest is not fighting his way through the crowd. This guy is being pushed from behind. This guy is being pushed from behind because all the other ones are saying, yeah, get the old guy on the river. Sacrificing himself. My ass, this guy is getting pushed in by everybody else. He is not sacrificing himself for the good of the species. He does not like the idea of this whatsoever.
We're all made of DNA.
Animals, including us, behaving not for the good of the species or the group, but to maximize number of copies of genes left in the next generation. And what you see is 3 ways in which this could occur, 3 building blocks. The first one being known as individual selection. And the most straightforward way is to behave in a way to maximize the number of times you reproduce yourself. Second building block, which is there's another way of accomplishing the same thing that you just did with individual selection. As follows. One of the things that could be relied upon in life is that you are related to your relatives. And what you get is the more closely related you are, the more genes you share in common with them. On a statistical level, identical twins share 100% of their genes, full siblings 50%, half siblings 25%. So the closer a relative is to you, the more genes they share in common with you. So suddenly you've got this issue. You're an identical twin and your identical sibling has the same genes that you do. Individual selection, you will be just as successful as passing on copies of your genes into the next generation if you forego reproducing to make it possible for your identical twin to do so. And out of that, you get something that makes perfect sense instantly, which is evolution selects for organisms cooperating with their relatives. Something along those lines. And thus we have the second building block known as kin selection. Inclusive fitness, kin selection. First building block, individual selection, passing on copies of your own genes as a way to maximize future success. Second version, helping out relatives. Here would be evidence for it. Here's one example. Very cool study done some years back by a couple, Seyfarth and Cheney, University of Pennsylvania, looking at vervet monkeys. And these were vervet monkeys out in Tanzania, I believe. And what they did was a whole bunch of these vervet monkeys were sitting around and they, the researchers, had made really high quality recordings of various vocalizations from the monkeys over time. So they had the sound of each animal giving an alarm call, giving a friendly gesture call, giving a whatever. And what they would then do is hide a microphone inside some bushes and play the sound of one of the infants from the group giving an alarm call. So what does the mother of that infant do? She instantly gets agitated and looks over at the bush. That's her child, all of that. How to know that everyone else in that vervet group understands kin selection? What does everybody else do? They all look at the mother. That's whoever's mother. What is she going to do next? They understand the relatedness and they understand what the response will be. All the other vervets look at the mother at that point. Whoa, I'm sure glad that's not my kid giving an alarm call from the bushes. They understand kinship. Another version of that came out in these studies. So you've got 2 females, each of whom has a kid, a daughter or whatever, and female A and female B. And one day, female A does something absolutely rotten to female B. And later that day, the child of female B is more likely than chance to do something rotten to the child of female A. They're keeping track of not only revenge, but not revenge on the individual who did something miserable to you, but displaced by 1 degree of reproduction, keeping track of kinship. Animals can do this. All sorts of primate species can do this. And as we'll see, all sorts of other species can do this also. All sorts of other species want to figure out who their cousins are. They don't want to figure out. Evolution has sculpted an ability to optimize behavior along lines of relatedness in all sorts of species. So now the third piece, the third final building block of making sense of social behavior in the context of real contemporary evolutionary theory, the third block here, which is you look at animals and they're not all just competing with non-relatives and things. They actually cooperate with each other. And you look close enough and you see they're not relatives. They're not relatives, yet you get all sorts of altruistic behavior, and you've got it under a whole bunch of domains. Because this brings up the question, why should you ever be cooperative with another individual if you're a social animal? At every possibility, you should stab them in the back and be selfish. And the reason why that isn't a good idea is there's all sorts of circumstances where many hands make the task light, or whatever that is. Cooperation can have synergistic benefits. And you see that with species that are cooperative hunters, where they are not necessarily relatives. They will chase one, chasing an animal, while the other is getting ready to cut a corner on it. Cooperative behavior, and they increase the likelihood of them getting a kill. Under all sorts of circumstances, cooperation has a strong evolutionary payoff, even among non-relatives, with a condition, which is you're not putting more into it than you are getting. That is reciprocal. And this opens up the third building block of all of this, which is reciprocal altruism. Cooperation, altruistic behavior among non-relatives, but undergoing very strict sort of constraints of it's got to be reciprocated with all sorts of rules like that. First example, vampire bats. It happens that vampire bats have an interesting system of reciprocal altruism, which is a whole bunch of females will share the same nest. Will have all their kids in there mixed in, and these are not necessarily related, so we've just left the world of kin selection. They're not necessarily related, but they have a reciprocal altruist system. Each female comes in, disgorges the blood, and feeds everybody's babies. And they'll all feed each other's babies, and everything is terrific, and they have this blood vampire commune going there, and they have reached a nice state of stable cooperation. Now, make the bats think that one of the females is cheating on them. Out comes that female, flying off to find some blood, and instead you net her and get a hold of her and take some syringe full of air and pump up the throat sac, so the throat sac is really full and distended, but there's no blood in there. You've just pumped air into there, and stick her back into the nest there, and she's just sitting there happily, and the other females are sitting saying, look at her, look at how much blood she's got there. I can't believe it, because she's not feeding our kids. She's cheating on us, and the next time they go out to feed, the other females don't feed her kids. A tit for tat.
We're all made of DNA.
In various populations, you've got a population of something or others, and some biogeographic event occurs which causes a subset of them to get isolated from everybody else. A land bridge disappears, or somebody drops a lake there, or who knows what, but something isolates a small subset of the population. So these guys go about reproducing by their standards, and these guys go about reproducing by their standards. And what's going to be a characteristic very soon of the smaller population, they're going to be more inbred than this population, simply because they're smaller. They're going to have a higher degree of relatedness among individuals. So now we throw our second piece of our three building blocks, throw in kin selection, and what that immediately predicts is levels of cooperation will be higher in this group than in this group, because the higher degree of relatedness. That's great. And that's great because once we see how sort of cooperative systems have a larger payoff, you will get a crystallization so that everybody, the second or third cousins, are eventually going to have to be just as cooperative as the siblings are with each other. You are going to fix a trait of cooperation in that population at a high rate. So notice here, in this case, we have a high degree of cooperation driven by kin selection, whereas these guys are going about their usual savage at each other's throats business. Biogeographic event reverses, and these guys get reincorporated into the main population, and they're so different by then that they get a different color. And what you've got then is, here in the large population, here is a nucleus of animals who are cooperating. And here is the huge unwashed mass of the ones who are not. And everything we know about reciprocal altruism, all of that means that these guys are going to start outcompeting these guys. And the model that is used is cooperation will have to crystallize outward. Animals will have to join in these cooperative patterns because these guys will outcompete them. What do we have? This is called a founder effect. This is a small population that, thanks to being inbred, has fixated some trait that's advantageous, where the evolution here moves faster than in here because of the smaller population with the inbreeding. Some adaptive trait comes in there, they get reinduced into the main population, and this founder-driven trait quickly spreads throughout the population. And what you get here is, if the same thing is occurring in the realm of behavior, reciprocal cooperative behavior, somewhere in here you have a transition from this being a kin selection phenomenon to this being a reciprocal altruism phenomenon. So that stands as one of the models out there for how do you jumpstart cooperation in non-relative populations. You use inbred founder populations to drive it there. And just to have a metaphor, all you need to do, think about in some city, there's some occupation, some mercantile, something or other, that there's a gazillion of them and all sorts of people work in that, and there's a subgroup of people there who work in this who are all related. And as a result, they do something cooperative and kin selective. They make low interest loans to each other. And as a result, they're more successful at business. And they get incorporated into here, and what you then have is this economic force that everybody else has to join in to this cooperative business of trusting each other, or low interest loans, or I trust you like a sibling, you don't have to pay me until next week. Used to be that only siblings trusted each other like siblings, but a force there for more cooperation, a driving force of inbred kin selection initially.
We're all made of DNA.
If you are presented those two skulls and told this one's a female, this one's a male, you can begin to figure out stuff like males are a lot bigger than females. So let's state it here as there's a big ratio of males to females. Meanwhile, in the next county, you've discovered another species and their skulls are the exact same size. Oh, here's a species where there's no difference in body size between males and females. In which of those species, the first one like this, or the same size ones, in which ones would you expect to see more male aggression? First one. Okay, how come? Their bodies are built for it, which begins to tell you something. Their bodies are built for it, maybe because females have been selecting for that. You will see higher levels of aggression in species like this, where there's a big body size difference and much less of it in these guys. Next, you now ask how much variability is there in male reproductive success. In one of these species, all the males have 1 or 2 kids over their lifetime. In another species, 95% of the reproducing is carried out by 5% of the males. A huge variability skew in male reproductive success. Which species do you get the every male has a couple of kids and that's about it and all equally so? Which one? Second one. How come? Because these guys are being selected for aggression. If they're fighting, there is going to have to be something they're fighting for, differential reproductive access. Okay, so you see more variability in species that look like this. Next, females come into the equation. What do females want? What do females want in the species on the left versus the one on the right? On the left, what does the female want? What sort of male is the female interested in? Big, exactly. That's exactly the driving force on this. How come? Because she's not going to get anything else out of this guy. This guy is just going to, like the present is going to be some sperm, it might as well be some good sperm, some genetically well-endowed sperm that makes for a big, healthy offspring, increasing the odds of her passing on copies of her genes in the next generation. What about in this species? What's females looking for? Okay, good. Hold on to that for a second, and let's jump ahead a few lines. One of the species, males have never been known to do the slightest affiliative thing with infants. They just get irritated and harass them and all of that. And the other, you have soccer dads who are doing as much raising of the kids as the females are. In which species do you get lots of male parental behavior? The one on the right. Okay, so lots of male parental behavior here. So somebody just gave the answer here, female choice. What would you see in this species? You want big, muscular guys. You want whatever is selling that season for what counts as a hot male because you want your offspring to have those traits. And somebody else called out here, what do females want in this category? And what was it you said?
Good personality.
Good personality, yes. Able to express emotions. That too. Okay, somebody else shouted out something that gets at the broader, more globally Oprah version. Okay, somebody shouted out parental behavior. You want a male who's going to be competent at raising your children. What is it that you want really most deeply? You want to get the male who is the most like a female you can get a hold of. You don't want some big old stupid guy with a lot of muscle and canines who's wasting energy on stuff like that he could be using instead on, reading Goodnight Moon or some such thing. What you want instead is somebody who's as close to a female as you can get to without getting this lactation stuff. Males are chosen who are the same size as females. Choosing for paternal behavior, parental behavior, or parental, let's just put that in there. And that begins to explain the top line, species in which there's a lot of sexual dimorphism, morphism, shapes of things, sexual dimorphism, big difference in body size as a function of gender. And in these sorts of species where you get male parental behavior, not much variability, male reproductive success, low levels of aggression, and what females want is a competent male, these are ones where you see low degrees of sexual dimorphism. What do you want the individual to do? Prove to you that he can provide for the kids. And suddenly you have a world of male birds courting the females by bringing them worms, bringing them evidence that they are able to successfully forage, they are able to get food. Female choice is built around appearance and behavioral competence at being able to be a successful parent in order to pass on as many copies of genes to the next generation as possible. Okay, how about lifespan? In which species is there a big difference in life expectancy as a function of gender? First one. Here, are you choosing for males to be as close to females as possible, and thus the physiology. Here, you got these guys who are like using huge amounts of energy to build up all this muscle, which takes a lot more work to keep in calories, and you're more vulnerable in famines. You've got these males with high testosterone, which does bad stuff to your circulatory system. You've got males who, thanks to all this aggression, are getting more injuries, more likely in species in which you have a lot of sexual dimorphism in body size, you get a lot of sexual dimorphism in lifespan. And then you look at these guys, and it's basically no difference by gender. Moving on, considering primates that are one of these two patterns, in which one do you always want to give birth to twins? In which one do you never want to give birth to twins? Who gives birth to twins? The one on the right. Of course. How come? Because you got two parents on the scene. You are not a single mother, and you are a single mother rhesus monkey or something, and you give birth to twins, and you do not have the remotest chance of enough energy, enough calories on board to get both of them to survive. A twin that is born in a species like this has the same rate that it occurs in humans, about a 1% rate, and it is almost inevitable that one of them does not survive. Meanwhile, there's a whole world of primate species with this profile where the females always twin. Finally, you are the female, and you are contemplating bailing out on your kids and disappearing because there's some really hot guy over there who you want to mate with. So you are going to leave and abandon your kids. In which species do you see that behavior? The one on the right. The one on the right, because you bail out and the male is there taking care of them. You bail out in here and you've lost your investment and copies of your genes for the next generation. You see females cheating on the fathers in this species, but not in species like this, because the father is long gone in 3 other counties there courting somebody else, and doesn't matter, you're not going to get any help from him. What you have here is this contrast between tournament species and pair bonding species. Tournament species, these are all the species where you get males with big, bright plumage. That's the world of peacocks, that's the world of chickens with pecking orders, dominating like that, lots of aggression. That's the world of primates where, as in savanna baboons, the male is twice as big as the female. Tournament species, where a lot of passing on of genes is decided by male-male aggression in the context of tournaments. Go and look at a new primate species and see this much of a difference in skull size, and you'd just be able to derive everything else about its social behavior. Very consistent across birds, across fish, across primates, across all of those, this dichotomy between tournament species and pair bonding species.
We're all made of DNA.
One asks expectedly, where do humans fit in on this one? Where do humans fit? And the answer is complicatedly. Are we a tournament species? Are we a pair bonding species? What's up with that? What we will see is we're kind of in between. When you look at the degree of sexual dimorphism, we are not like baboons, but we're sure not like marmosets. We're somewhere in the middle. Variability is somewhere in the middle there. I'm not going near that one. Lifespan, the dimorphism in lifespan tends to be in between, and parental behavior and likelihood of all of those. You look at a number of measures, and by next lecture, we will be looking at some genetics of what monogamous species and tournament species look like, and we're right in the middle. In other words, that explains like 90% of literature, because we're not a classic tournament species and we're not a classic pair bonding one. We are terribly confused in the middle there. And everything about anthropology supports that. Most people on the planet right now are in a form of monogamous relationships, in a culture that demands monogamy. An awful lot of people who are in monogamous relationships in such cultures aren't really in monogamous relationships. Traditionally, most cultures on this planet allowed polygamy. Nonetheless, in most of those polygamous cultures, the majority of individuals were pair bonded and monogamous. You get 2 different versions of polygamy in different social systems of humans. One is economic polygamy, which is you're basically sitting around and the wealthiest guy in the village is the one who can have the largest number of wives, an enormous skew in reproductive success that's driven by economics. The other type is demographic. You have a culture where, for example, you have a warrior class. Guys spend 10 years as warriors, New York City accent, as warriors. They don't worry, there's no anxiety, but they eventually worry about getting a wife, because by the time they're done being a warrior, they're like 25, and they marry someone who's 13, which is what you see in a lot of traditional cultures that follow that pattern. And at that point, you got a problem, which is an awful lot of those guys have been killed over the course of 10 years of being involved in high levels of aggression and 10 more years of life expectancy to catch up with you. There's a shortage of males. So you see polygamy there driven by demographics. We have one really confused, screwed up species here, because we are halfway in between in all sorts of these measures.
Robert Sapolsky, neurobiologiste à l'université de Stanford en Californie, étudie le stress. Il analyse ses répercussions sur notre organisme et le lien entre le statut social et le degré d'exposition à ce mal.
Vous avez un grand mâle qui perd une bagarre et pourchasse un jeune adulte, qui mord une femelle, qui gifle un jeune, qui fait tomber un bébé d'un arbre. Tout ça en 15 secondes. Si vous vivez ici et que vous êtes un babouin, il ne vous faut que 3 heures par jour pour vous procurer votre compte de calories. Ça vous laisse donc 9 heures de temps libre par jour pour rendre la vie de vos voisins infernale. Ils ne sont pas stressés parce que les lions les pourchassent. Ils sont stressés les uns par les autres, par des tensions socio-psychologiques qu'ils ont eux-mêmes inventées.
Chaque mâle sait quelle est sa place dans la société, qui peut le torturer, qui il peut torturer, et qui sa victime peut à son tour torturer. Ces primates s'organisent selon des groupes clairement hiérarchisés et se soumettent mutuellement à un stress social. Les hormones du stress peuvent déclencher une très forte réaction cardiovasculaire, emballement du cœur et augmentation de la tension.
L'artère d'un subalterne est bien plus touchée par l'athérosclérose que l'artère d'un dominant.
Le stress et la sécrétion d'hormones qui en résultent élèvent la tension artérielle, endommagent les parois des artères et favorisent la formation de plaques.
Le stress que vous subissez aujourd'hui a des conséquences sur votre santé dans les années à venir.
Le stress social et psychologique, que ce soit chez l'homme, le babouin ou le macaque, peut boucher les artères, entraver la circulation du sang et mettre le cœur en danger.
La troupe de Kikorok est celle avec laquelle j'ai commencé il y a 30 ans. C'était une troupe de babouins typiques, avec des mâles agressifs, une société très stratifiée et des femelles qui se faisaient harceler. Un groupe, tout ce qu'il y a de plus banal. Et puis, il y a maintenant près de 20 ans, il est arrivé quelque chose d'horrible, mais de scientifiquement passionnant.
Les singes de la troupe de Kikorok ont eu un jour l'idée d'aller piocher leur nourriture dans les poubelles d'un campement pour touristes. Dans les déchets se trouvait de la viande infectée par le bacille de la tuberculose. Résultat, près de la moitié des mâles de la troupe sont morts. Pour Robert, ce sont 10 ans de recherche qui semblent perdus. Mais il remarque alors que ceux qui sont morts sont les mâles. Ils avaient mangé la viande infectée sans en laisser aux autres.
Ce n'était pas aléatoire. Les mâles les plus agressifs, qui n'étaient pas très sociables, ne passaient pas beaucoup de temps à se toiletter et à traîner avec les autres. Voilà les mâles qui sont morts.
Tous les mâles alpha ont alors disparu et la troupe s'en est trouvée transformée.
Il restait 2 fois plus de femelles que de mâles. Et les mâles en question étaient, pour employer notre jargon scientifique, c'étaient des gentils. Ce n'étaient pas des brutes épaisses. Ils étaient doux avec les femelles, très sociables. Ça a complètement changé l'ambiance.
Quand les babouins mâles deviennent adolescents, ils quittent généralement leur troupe d'origine et finissent par en trouver une nouvelle.
Et quand des adolescents rejoignaient la troupe, ils arrivaient en roulant des mécaniques, comme tous les adolescents de la Terre. Et il leur fallait 6 mois pour apprendre que dans cette troupe, on ne se comportait pas comme ça. On n'était pas agressif, on passait du temps à se toiletter, les mâles étaient doux les uns envers les autres, on ne passait pas ses nerfs sur les femelles. Il fallait aux nouveaux venus environ 6 mois pour assimiler ce comportement. Cette troupe se caractérisait par un niveau d'agressivité très bas et une sociabilité élevée. Et c'est toujours le cas 20 ans plus tard. Est-ce que ces babouins ont des problèmes d'hypertension? Non. Est-ce qu'ils ont des problèmes d'anxiété et un taux élevé d'hormones du stress? Non.
La troupe de Kikorok n'a pas seulement survécu sans stress, elle a prospéré.
Que nous apprennent les babouins? Ne mordez pas les autres sous prétexte que vous avez passé une mauvaise journée. Ne vous vengez pas sur eux. Les relations sociales ont beaucoup d'importance. Mais ces choses sont très importantes. Et l'une des plus grandes formes de sociabilité est de donner plutôt que de recevoir. Tout ça rend le monde meilleur. Les babouins nous apprennent aussi que si eux sont capables en une génération de transformer un système social qui paraissait immuable, nous ne pouvons pas rester les bras croisés en invoquant que les relations humaines ne peuvent pas changer.
Well, that's... I don't know. Let's see. I think for starters, it suggests we should give tubercular meat to all of the aggressive males on this planet.
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me are all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made of DNA.
I really think this is a subject that everybody on Earth should be forced to learn about at gunpoint. Everybody has to learn behavioral biology because we're being behavioral biologists every time we serve on a jury. Every time we vote whether or not money should be spent on solving some problem, whether it's a problem and whether it's solvable or not. Every time we try to make sense of a family member sunk in depression, are they having a biochemical disorder or are they just indulging themselves? We are behavioral biologists all the time, so it's probably a good thing that we be informed once.